way that's productive. And instead what we have is sort of comment boards at the bottom that are mostly sort of useless, angry people screaming at each other. I do think it's a problem that needs to be solved, but it's a mechanism problem.
I don't agree. You call us, I don't know what a social mechanism is. It sounds very painful. I mean, it's really very simple. The issue is one of anonymity. It's not the internet. So when you look at non-anonymous sites and networks like Facebook and Twitter, actually the level of civility is much higher. The problem is one of anonymity, and I think it extends to something broader in terms of the way in which many people see the internet as a right and not a responsibility. Jeff Jarvis, who I think we're all friendly with, said that the internet is the next society, and he may be right. And in the 18th century, when we were figuring out modern industrial society, we came up with social contract theory about rights and responsibilities. I think the same is true of the internet. It's a reality, for better or worse. It is perhaps the central fact of social, cultural, and political life in the 21st century. And it needs to be understood not only in terms of rights, of taking, of stealing, of getting it for free, and all the other problems associated with the internet, but also one of responsibility. And the key responsibility in the West, I'm not talking about Iran or China where one is jailed for one's opinions, but I think the key responsibility in our relatively democratic culture is to reveal who you are. I think when you do away with anonymity, then you basically solve the problem of civility. We're all respectful, except for Mika, of course, because we can look each other in the eye. If we were hidden, we would be Bushing and O'Reillying and all the rest of it.
I don't disagree with you at all, Andrew. I actually
Can I quote you on that?
I respect you so much I brought your book with me. But you're right that anonymity is a problem, and it's allowed both wonderful and terrible things to be expressed online. There's certain forms of anonymity online that give people who otherwise could never have found vital help because they live in a community where they're a minority of some kind and they cannot possibly talk openly to the people in their small town, and they find the help they need online. So it's a double-edged sword. But to go to what matters, what the internet is doing to our democratic culture, I think it's fair to note that the trend has been towards owning your words and using your real name, and that people who started out as anonymous bloggers in many cases have now come forward and are using their names.
Or were outed.
Or were
against
outed.
their will.
Well, in some cases, I know some African-American bloggers, for example, who started the blog Jack and Jill Politics, who had to be anonymous originally because they didn't know whether they were going to get death threats and whether they'd be hounded out of their communities for writing what they were writing.
Why would they get death threats?
Because there's still racism in America. That's why. And that they were fearful as a minority using their own name online. They have both Cheryl Conti and Baratunde Thurston now both blog in their own names because this transition that we're going through, there's been a shift. And I think you have to earn your reputation every day online, and that is the pressure to use your real name. People who comment anonymously, they really don't affect anything.
Please.
Well, I think that we're getting to some agreement here. I think we're all agreeing that it's a social problem instead of a technology problem. But if it's a social problem, I think we have to recognize that takes a long time to solve, that adjusting to it is going to take decades maybe, and that in this time we might face more information online or in the news that's false. We might have more people believing things that aren't true as a result of this change. I mean, I guess it's what you call messiness, but it might be messy for a long time is what I'm saying.
Can we do this social mechanism point that you were responding to? Is there a role for government to play then in policing this system? I mean, checking the internet. You've just been yourself involved in a controversy just last week, right? Where you were accused by editors within Wikipedia of exercising too much authority, right? Because you were removing what you thought to be sexually offensive material. There's a story had come out on that. You removed it from the websites. You said it was all over, or at least what I read was that you had said it was all over Wikipedia, and you removed it, and then your editors came back at you. I mean, should you be, genius that you are, the head of the internet? Should we have Lee Kuan Yew imported from Singapore? How do we deal with this?
Well, I mean, I think that we do need governance structures, but those governance structures need to be flexible. They need to be, aware of different opinions, and they don't have to be, certainly not from the government. I don't think anyone in this room would really suggest it's a good idea to repeal the First Amendment and have the government regulate what information is online. I think within, the Wikipedia world, what I would say to that is, it's messy. One of the interesting things about Wikipedia is that we do all of our work publicly and in the open, and the kinds of disagreements and tussles and struggles within the community that would normally, at the Encyclopedia Britannica, go on behind closed doors, we do in public because that's the way we do our work. So I don't think it's really, it doesn't indicate any reason to think that the government should step in and do it. Now, at the same time, there is a role for law, and certainly all of the kinds of law that has applied to speech over the years, libel and things like this, does need to be re-examined, thought about. How do we adapt it to the internet age? How do we deal with the problem of anonymous libel, for example, where it can be very hard to track someone? Those are interesting questions that I do think there's room for improvement in the law. But that's really not about the government deciding about information. It's about applying very traditional notions of what's the boundaries of free speech.
Certifying authority. So I wrote to a couple of economists today to tell them about this debate. One of them said, Dan Ariely, a psychologist really, said we need a certifying authority. He didn't specify whether it was government or not. Yes? Will that help you with keeping expertise on its pedestal?
I don't. A certifying authority, I don't know how that would
I think
work.
it was off the top of his head, but just the idea.
Well, I think what Mika talks about is the reality, which is we are building a reputation-rooted culture where we're doing away with the old structures, the old bureaucracies, the old hierarchies of media. And what is, for better or worse, emerging are people like ourselves, pundits, who actually peddle our wares on the internet and self-promote or self-develop our work. What most concerns me, though, is it's fine for guys like us. We get our book contracts, we do consulting. But what we haven't brought up is economics. What we haven't brought up is to have a viable democracy, you need well-informed citizens. To have well-informed citizens, you need reliable media, on or offline. It doesn't matter whether it's electronic or physical. It makes no difference. But if you don't have editors, if you don't have professional journalists, then you don't have well-informed citizens. What we haven't brought up today is the fact that more and more professional media people are being laid off, and the internet economy is still struggling to figure out a coherent business model.
And there's a guy who's made his living this way. So
if you just look at the technology sphere online, the richness of that space in terms of the amount of reporting by professionals compared to what we had 20 years ago, when the only thing you could get if you wanted information on Apple was Macworld, and it only came once a month, is quite stunning. So I think we're going through a transition, and we will still see plenty of people.
Transition, though,
yes. Well, print is dying.
We've been going through a transition. I've been in this business since the mid-90s. We always talk about transition. When people use that word, what they're really saying is they can't figure out the future.
Well, that's true. We can't. I wouldn't predict the future here because I'd probably be wrong.
And you use the word rich, Mika. I mean, surely you were using that ironically. No one's getting rich. No one's being paid. So the only way to produce high-quality media on something like Wikipedia is to do it in your spare time.
Actually, Andrew, that's one of the many errors in your book where you say that no one is getting rich off the internet.
Clever doesn't mean right.
I actually want to go back to the question about the government.
Well, we're actually 30 seconds from your closing statement. So how about you segue into your closing statement with right now?
Okay, fine. The issue was whether there's a role for government here, and I want to make two suggestions because as we enter the brave new world, there is a role for government. The first one is that we need to understand that the internet is the dial tone of our time. Okay, and in the same way in the 1930s, when the telephone was spreading, but not spreading to everyone, we instituted under the Universal Service Act the idea that we would subsidize delivery of dial tone to poor people in rural areas. And today, we need to do the same thing in terms of affordable high-speed broadband so that everybody can be connected. The government's role is equal access to this vital infrastructure. The second one is